Go. Where did it go? Where did it go? I'm just going to sit here for the next 5 minutes and just go, where'd it go? Where'd it go? Yeah, I forgot there's like, in my friend and family group, there's a whole rash of November birthdays and things like that. My dad just turned 60 yesterday. So I'm like, where did the time go? And where did the next 5 minutes and just go, where'd it go? Indeed, Dr. Gilchrist, indeed. Aw, your birthday's tomorrow. Oh, that's nice. My birthday's not until December, and it's 2 weeks before Christmas, and I'm not going home for Christmas, so it could be kind of a bummy birthday, but we'll make the best of it. I have a Smedley. Smedley makes everything better. He is a very good prepper. He is a very good prepper, and yes, I call him a prepper. Okay. He can be a pain in the neck, and also he needs a bath. He kind of stinks. He licks his paws too much. Okay, so we are moving on to social psychology, and the last time that we were here, we were starting to talk about how we tend to view other people's behaviors. And one of the things that you're going to find when we talk about considering other people's behaviors, so we judge behavior. We basically judge what's going on with a person based on what we can see. And some of that is a quirk, or rather a feature of how we're wired. I am capable of understanding my own mind and how I operate, but I can't necessarily read yours. I can't get into your mind and see what makes you tick. And given that there are basically about 7 billion people on this earth, and you will encounter a great number of them at any given point, if you were capable of reading the mind of everybody you knew and getting into the head of everybody that you knew, that's a lot of mental bandwidth. You probably don't have the mental space for that. So we have to judge behavior based on what we see, not on internal mental states that we have no access to. So for example, if I have a student who says, Dr. Gilchrist, I really love your class, but they never come to class. And I'm talking pre-pandemic, like y'all that are Zooming in, you're technically coming to class. But let's say somebody was like, Dr. Gilchrist, I really love your classes, but you never show up to my class. I've got a conflict between what you're telling me and your behavior. And your behavior is telling me something very, very different than your words. I can't get inside your mind, and I only see you in class. So if you're not coming to class, I have to basically judge what I think is going on based on how you behave. And based on how you're behaving, you're cool with not coming. You know, that's the only judgment call that I can make, unless you're like, I'm having a hard time, I'm stressed, I'm too busy, I have other things going on. So we have to judge based on behavior. And so Fritz Heider basically refers to this as attribution theory. How do we explain the behavior of other people based on, how do we explain the behavior of other people, particularly when they do things that are either very different from how we would do them or are unexpected? So we need to talk about the different types of attributions that we can make. We can make a personal attribution, or we can make a situational attribution. So a personal attribution is you behaved this way because of something inside of yourself. So for example, you cut in front of me at the lunch line because you're selfish. So basically, you behave that way not because of something situational, but because of something internal, something based on your personality. You did that because you're selfish. On the other hand, a situational attribution is behavior being explained by external factors, situational factors. You cut in front of me at lunch because you have 15 minutes to get to your next class and you thought that I wouldn't mind if you cut in front of me. So it's not because of a personality trait, but because of a situational external factor outside of yourself. And oftentimes what we are going to find is that our attributions are based on what we call a just world hypothesis. So, you know what phrase kind of tore me up when I was a kid? The idea that life wasn't fair. I have, even to this day, a very big thing about fairness, like disproportionate amounts of fairness. And some of that is probably due to my wiring. I'm all about like rules. They give structure. Things are better when we follow rules. That's not always the case. But the just world hypothesis is based on the idea that the world is inherently fair, that people get what they deserve and people deserve what they get. So here's now that basically comes to the idea, I'm a good person, I deserve good things, or I get good things because I'm a good person. But there's a darker side to it. So people get what they deserve. That means bad people are going to be punished. People that hurt you are going to eventually get their comeuppance, or karma is going to catch up to them. Or the flip side, people deserve what they get. If you don't make a lot of money, if you're in poverty, that implies that you did something wrong, that you did something to deserve it, that there is something inherently flawed in you that makes that happen. And the same is true for different vehicles of oppression. If you can't break the glass ceiling at work when you're surrounded by a bunch of male colleagues, well, that didn't happen because of situational factors. It's because you're not working hard enough. If you're being discriminated against, or if you find that your racial or ethnic group can't really achieve to the level that more dominant in society groups do, well, it's because your group is just naturally inferior, or you're not interested in that. And these are kind of the implications of a just world. That if something bad happens to you, it's because you deserved it. If something good happens to you, it's because you deserved it. And here's where I kind of break that down. Bad things happen to good people. People get treatment that they don't necessarily deserve. And sometimes bad people get away with what they do. Sorry, folks, the just world hypothesis is an illusion, but we tend to cling to it. And that really informs how we judge other people. But we're a lot harder on people when they make a mistake or when they mess up. And this is what is referred to as the fundamental attribution error. So this is a pretty critical concept. Generally, when somebody does something that we don't expect, we tend to overestimate the role that their personality plays in it, and we tend to underestimate the situation. So if somebody cuts in front of me in the lunch line or at the store, I'm going to be more inclined to think they did that because they're selfish and they think their needs are more important than mine. Then maybe they have somewhere that they have to be and they're running out of time. Or maybe they didn't see me. Or maybe they didn't know where the line starts. So we overestimate the role that personality plays, and we underestimate the role that the situation might play. So when we see somebody speeding down the highway, we're kind of like, that crazy jerk. And sorry, I know I just used the C word, so my apologies for that. That jerk. But on the other hand, maybe they have a family member in the emergency room. Maybe they're late to work. It doesn't necessarily excuse their behavior, but maybe it's not because they think they're better than you or more important than you. And here's the thing. So the flip side of this, of the fundamental attribution error, is that we're a lot nicer to ourselves than we are to other people. So the fundamental attribution error is when we assume that the person is doing this because of their personality. So we overestimate personality, we underestimate the situation. We basically do the flip for ourselves. So this is what's referred to as the actor-observer bias. When it's our behavior, when we cut in line, when we speed, well, it's because, well, I was in a hurry. I had somewhere that I had to be. I didn't see the other person. So we tend to focus more on the situation to explain away our behavior. And when it comes to other people, we tend to focus on their personality traits. When you do it, it's because you're a bad person. But when it's me, it's because of the situation that I was in. Can you think of any instances where you've done something like that? So on the Discord or on the chat. Anybody? So this requires a little bit of self-awareness. When have you noticed that you've done something like this? Has that ever happened to you? Huh?
I said probably, but I have terrible memory.
Okay. Oh, here's an idea. So you forget something that somebody tells you and you're like, I have a really bad memory. They'll think, she obviously doesn't think I'm that important. Oh, are you? Oh, okay, we got one in the chat. You've done that with your siblings, okay? And while I am waiting for you to chat, I will grab something to drink, for I am thirsty. Not quite. It's Kroger Seltzer Cranberry Lime. Dr. G Fuel comes after class because I have to meet with more prospective students and talk up how awesome Cotty is, and hopefully they come here. All right. So the actor-observer bias and the fundamental attribution error, I can promise you this. This will show up on the 4th exam. Make sure you understand the difference. Okay, I'm gonna preemptively put the straw under the mask. So here's the thing that I've kind of learned about drinking fizzy things with this straw. When it starts to bubble, it bubbles out the straw, so I have to preemptively just get the straw in there and just start sipping. Okay. So one of the other things that we do is that we stereotype other people. And everybody does this. So why do we fall prey to stereotypes? So this happens for a couple of reasons. And let's be really clear. Stereotyping people is generally ill-advised. And the reason for that is because you are judging somebody on the basis of some type of group membership. You're basically looking at people as a monolith rather than seeing them for individuals. And I'm not necessarily saying that this is okay, but the real, to borrow a phrase, the real sticky wicket about stereotypes is that they happen because we have cognitive limitations. So here's the thing. Getting to know every single person as an individual and figure out how their mind works, it's what you should do, but your mind doesn't necessarily have time for that. You don't always have the time. You don't always have the energy. You don't always have the attention. And so one of the things that I think it's really important to be aware of, and I actually talked about this last week when I talked about being an ally to other groups, is that your mind wants to create categories. Your mind wants to put things into boxes because it makes the world simpler. Not saying it's right, but it's what your mind wants to do. So you need to be aware of the fact that your mind wants to create categories to navigate your world. And this helps you navigate your world more easily, but it's pretty error prone. And here's where it gets really critical too, and your information diet is so important. These stereotypes are automatically activated, and they're largely due to the culture that we grow up in that is constantly sending messages to us before we are even old enough to fully understand what's going on. So over time, this kind of goes back to our dual track mind, our conscious mind and our unconscious mind. That unconscious track is automatic. The conscious track is controlled and very, very thoughtful. So when you watch a lot of shows that have people that look like you, and you don't watch a lot of shows with people that don't look like you, when you listen to music made by people who look like you, and you don't really listen to a lot of music for people who don't look like you, when you don't really spend a lot of time learning about other points of view besides your own or those that are similar to you, you get these automatic activations. And so it's part of the reason why, because these stereotypes are automatically activated, that I think it's really important to diversify your feed, so to speak. Diversify your Instagram feed, diversify Facebook for those of you that are still on it, diversify your TikTok feed, diversify the podcasts that you listen to, diversify the music that you listen to. Once you get more representation from people that are different from you in some sort of way, and to be clear, it's going to be really hard to undo several decades of this cultural learning that we're all subject to. But by diversifying your feed, you can start to make those changes. So one of the other things that I would recommend, if you're interested in learning about some of these automatic activations. So when I was in college, so for those who may not know, I started going to college in 2001. In the fall of 2001. And so something that was really starting to take hold in social psychology was what we call an implicit association test. And so the idea here, and you can go to implicit.harvard.edu, and basically what you can do, you can look at different social attitudes that you might potentially have. So there's a skin tone implicit association test. So you can look at things like colorism. Probably one of the first implicit studies that I ever heard of. Now this is kind of related to whiteness versus blackness. And one of the first really cool pieces of information that I learned in my social psych class when I was a freshman was that people are more likely to associate weapons and make a connection between weapons and black faces compared to harmless objects and black faces. But there are a variety of different social attitudes here, and you can test them out. So we have Native American, Asian American, gender and science, transgender people, sexuality, gender and career, race, religion, weight, presidents, disability, and age. And so these are some different things you can do. There are also some health-related ones and mental health. So they include exercise, COVID-19, marijuana, anxiety, depression, eating shame, healthy food, healthy self-harm. So there are a lot of different things that you can learn about your implicit attitudes. Now, one thing that I will mention, the implicit association test is starting to get used more and more for implicit bias training. One thing that I will mention is that it's not a perfect task. There are some questions about its reliability. There are some questions about its validity, and some people have found that you can actually game the task, so to speak. So do kind of keep that in mind, but if you're interested in learning about some of the stereotypes or implicit biases that you might hold, this is one way to really be mindful of them and learn about them. So how are stereotypes maintained? Well, they're maintained on the basis of confirmation bias. So we are going to interpret somebody's behavior through the lens of a stereotype. So I'm going to give you an example of a stereotype, and I'm going to keep this really, really benign. Folks, Can somebody answer me what the stereotype is about people from Florida? That they're crazy. This is Dr. Gilchrist's reminder, because I am from Florida. The reason that you hear those Florida man stories is because our press has a very, very open relationship with the police department. And they also discovered that people really like the Florida man memes, so they also kind of play it up. These kind of people are everywhere. They don't just stay in Florida. But let's say that I did something really wacky, like danced around to the Harlem Shake song at the beginning of class. If you have the stereotype that people from Florida are crazy, you might view my behavior through the lens of that stereotype. Now, I'm using a very harmless example, but think about some times where, for example, there's a stereotype that people of other races might be angry. And when they get frustrated, and you see that frustration, some people will engage in confirmation bias. They'll go, see, that's what I told you. Like, they're just angry. They're angry all the time. And odds are pretty good. We don't see all the times where they're not angry. Also, consider the possibility that if somebody is angry, you might have done something to anger them, and they're not just running around being angry all the time. I know, right? Here's where it gets tricky. So I'm telling you about being mindful of these things, being mindful of your implicit biases, trying to diversify your feed. So here's where it gets complicated. So there are some of us that will work and we'll be aware that we hold these stereotypes because we live in a culture that privileges certain types of people over other types of people, just in general. So what happens when somebody doesn't fit that stereotype? So some of us will recognize, hey, I need to try to see people as individuals and work against breaking these stereotypes, work to break these stereotypes. Other people will compartmentalize. So we may actually subtype them and put them in a special category. So for example, when I was growing up as a teenager, I wasn't really very popular. I wasn't very pretty. I was overweight, so it was kind of hard to find cute clothes. And I was probably far too smart and far too pretentious for my own good. Like, y'all, I literally walked around campus with a Kafka book, like Franz Kafka. Didn't actually read the thing until I was in college. And I'm like, oh, I should have read this a lot sooner instead of pretending I was smarter than everybody else. But I wasn't like other types of girls. I wasn't like other types of girls, and other guys would basically say, you're not like other girls. So girls are like this, but you don't act like most girls. So you're a special type of girl. You're a guy's girl, so to speak. So here's the thing. We don't actually get rid of the stereotype. Other girls are mostly like this, but you're special. You're different. And you know what I tend to find about those very special subtypes? It's really easy to get knocked out of them. So when you behave in a way that they expect other people in that stereotype, they're gonna be like, oh, you're just like them. So we don't actually always do a very good job of breaking those stereotypes. We maintain it through a process of compartmentalization. And self-fulfilling prophecies can also play a role. So Gabby mentioned, by the way, a stereotype about people from Utah is that everyone is Mormon and they have really big families, which is funny to me. Yeah, big families can happen everywhere. My partner has like 13 aunts and uncles. One of those mid-Missouri like farming families. Yeah. We're definitely not going to Thanksgiving this year. Thanksgiving got canceled because his Thanksgiving typically has about 70 people, and they're all like really tall and slender. Like well, that's why we're not doing it. They're also all older. I actually kind of appreciate a year where I can go to a Thanksgiving and not feel like a dwarf. Like I'm 5'5" and everybody tells me how short I am, and I'm like, you know, the average woman is like 5'4", right? And they're like, that doesn't sound true. And I'm like, because you're a giant. You're a giant.
My brothers are all really tall.
You're a giant. I'm one of the tallest people in my family. I'm taller than my mother and all of my sisters. Okay, so one of the other things, that's neither here nor there. I just thought I'd bring that up because I thought it was funny. So self-fulfilling prophecies can also affect stereotypes. Being stereotyped by other people can affect our behavior. We know, based on a lot of data, that things like microaggressions and discrimination does play a factor in health. And it is absolutely a public health concern because it affects many, many people. And we know that being stereotyped by other people can affect behavior. One of the best studies to kind of look at this was research by Rosenthal and Jacobson in the 1960s. So they basically went into a classroom and just randomly, I'm saying random, they chose this on a random basis. They picked students. They were randomly selected, and they told teachers, hey, these students are really special. They're bloomers. They don't really look like they're very capable at academic achievement now, but they have a lot of potential to grow and bloom and become even better than they already are. And so they told teachers about this stereotype. And remember, there is nothing special about these students. They were picked at random. But when the end of this research period came, the people who were identified as bloomers showed increases in IQ, as Rosenthal and Jacobson has predicted. Why? Because the teachers treated them differently than other students. They got extra attention and they got encouragement, basically creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. So one of the things that we have to be careful of, if we have stereotypes about people or groups of people related to their achievement or their intellectual abilities or how they relate to other people, we need to consider how we treat them. If we go into a situation with a stereotype in our mind, it's going to affect our behavior and it's going to affect how we treat them. And they may end up behaving in ways that confirm all of the stereotypes that we had. And it's all because of that reciprocal determinism. We shape the behavior in somebody else, and that confirms and maintains our stereotype. And so negative stereotypes do lead to prejudice and discrimination. So prejudice is negative feelings and opinions and beliefs that are associated with a stereotype. I would also add that this is more likely to happen for people that are dominant and have more systemic power in society. Discrimination is unjustified treatment of people as a result of that prejudice. Discrimination is something that happens at a systemic level. Prejudice can be systemic as well, but it also can be on a personal level. Okay, everybody good? All right, so what biases lead to stereotypes and prejudice and discrimination? So obviously there's a power thing at play, but there are some different ideas that come into play. And one of those is scapegoating. So scapegoating is basically the idea that things are really, really hard for me, and I'm basically going to blame other people. So to give you an example, I've grown up since my freshman year of college watching the show South Park. Now, let's be clear. I do not always agree with the ideas that are in South Park, but I still watch it. And so to kind of give you an example of this, so there is an episode that happened probably either when I was in college or graduate school, where there was a time rift in town, and groups of people from the future, there was a very, very bad future with a lot of poverty and a lot of disease. So these people were basically coming from the future, going to the past through the time rift, and people were confused. They didn't understand what was going on. And all of a sudden, these people, because they were so used to living in poverty, these people from the future, they ended up basically, quote unquote, taking all the jobs. And so all of the working class people in town lost their jobs. And instead of blaming the corporations and the groups of people that were willing to hire people from the future for cheaper, they blamed the group coming from the future. So if you've ever heard the meme, they took our jobs, it's because of that. So instead of blaming the people who were actually responsible for this, they scapegoated. They blamed a group that was different from them for their current plight. One of the things that we do find is that especially areas that have a lot of generational poverty tend to have more prejudice than other areas. And that's largely because things are really bad. And so it's a lot easier when things are bad to blame other people than to actually hold the groups that are accountable and should be held accountable. We also have the just world hypothesis. People get what they deserve and people deserve what they get. If I have all of these things, it's because I've worked hard for them. If I have all of these privileges in society, it's because I must have worked for them. You didn't. I'm not saying you didn't have a hard life. I'm not saying that life hasn't been easy, folks. I've seen cars in my family get repossessed. I have been evicted from homes growing up. I occasionally had to use my my grocery bagging money that I earned every week to help my mother pay things like the electric bill. So these things, life has not always been easy. But I know that for somebody like me, if I go into a store like Nordstrom, nobody's going to be following me around wondering if I'm going to steal something. And that is not always the case for everybody. So there are some things that I will never have to worry about virtually because, basically because of how I look. That doesn't mean my life has been hard. It doesn't mean I asked for these things. It doesn't mean that I even want those things. I don't necessarily want those privileges. But the idea is that if I have things that are good, it must be because I'm a good person. And if you don't have good things, it's because you aren't doing enough or you're a bad person. So that's kind of that just world hypothesis. Additionally, there seems to be this idea that we should protect our groups from other groups. So it could be an idea of protecting a culture, protecting a heritage, or things like that. Okay, now here's where it gets trickier. We tend to prefer our groups over other groups. So we have what is called an in-group, out-group bias. We tend to favor our own groups over other people. So think about your friend groups right now. Are they pretty similar to you? Do they kind of look like you? Maybe not? Okay. Well, that's good. And that's one of the things that I really like about Kadi. That's one of the things that I really like about Kadi is you have an opportunity to get to know people who are really, really different from you. And that's cool. But one of the things that I know, when I look at my friend group, I tend to have a lot of people that look like me. Now, part of that is due to the fact that, well, this is Nevada. It's pretty homogenous here. But some of that is probably a matter of my own personal choice. And that's something that needs to be examined. And this actually can even occur with perception. So one of the things that we do find with this in-group, out-group bias, we have a much easier time. This is what's called an own race bias. We have a tendency to be better at noticing differences in faces from people of our own race. And we have greater difficulty distinguishing between faces of people of different races. So people of other races all look alike. Now, part of that happens because we don't have sufficient exposure to people that look different from us. So that's why, again, being at Kadi can be a really good thing. But this also occurs with other aspects of perception. Stereotypes can unconsciously influence the perception of weapons. People are a lot more likely to misperceive a harmless object as being a weapon when it is in the hands of somebody who is not white, for example, especially if they're Black. That's especially true for the case of Tamir Rice, a 12-year-old kid who was basically, if I am not mistaken, playing with a toy gun in a park and ended up being shot. It's like, and toy guns, because they do, some of them do look so similar to actual guns, have tells. They have red caps on either the handle or the trigger or the barrel, so that you know that that's not a real gun. And yet it was perceived as being something harmful. So how do we attempt to overcome this? So one thing that I would say, diversifying where you can. Now let's be clear. Don't pander. Don't be like, my friend group's not diverse enough. I need to add different types of people to my group. Nobody wants to feel like they're your token. Nobody wants to feel like they're your token. So be intentional and thoughtful about these things. Diversifying what you watch, what you listen to, what you expose yourself to, what you read, that's all really important. One of the other things that we find is that focusing on cooperating with people tends to foster understanding. There was a very famous study of groups of boys that were basically put in a summer camp. This was done by Sharif. It's called the Robbers Cave Study. And we do actually find that when groups that previously had been trained to compete against each other and antagonize each other, when we put them into a situation where we can cooperate with them, that tends to foster greater understanding and liking. Additionally, interacting with groups of people that are different from you, getting to know them as individuals can really help. Being mindful of how your brain wants to create categories and simplify the world and simplify people is a big deal. So for example, I know I'm about to talk about the election, but not about any particular politics. I thought it was very, very interesting when the Latino vote came in. How many people on the news were surprised that they don't all vote the same? And that's because they are not a monolith. People were kind of surprised, for example, that the Cuban vote in Florida largely went for Donald Trump. People were kind of surprised by that. I grew up in Florida, and I can tell you that there are definitely some differences between our Cuban population and other groups of people that may have come from San Salvador, Puerto Rico, etc. They're not a monolith. And yet people were very, very surprised that they don't all vote the same. Like, nobody votes all the same. Like, some groups do vote certain ways more commonly than others, but nobody is a monolith. We need to get to know each other as people and treat them as individuals where we can. So now let's talk about attitudes and behavior with the time that we have left. Okay, so what are some different things that you believe? I believe that Sour Patch Kids are the best candy ever made. What are some things that you believe? It can be anything. It could be silly. I don't care. What are some things that you believe? Pluto should be a planet. Okay. Yeah, it doesn't really work very well when I'm like, my very educated mother just served us 9. You have to say nachos, but I'm so used to 9 pizzas. It's just wrong. All right, other ideas. I mean, it is technically a dwarf planet. Does that count?
No.
That doesn't count? Okay.
You know what, they're like, well, it should be a planet, its orbit crosses. Well, you know what, someone got it.
Uranus and Neptune do that too.
So why should
Mercury does that.
literally
Anybody have some interesting things that they believe besides Pluto should be a planet? Not saying that that was bad, but I want to hear some other interesting beliefs that you have. So I had a cognitive psych professor when I was in college who believed that dreams weren't real because when you wake up, you can't tell people about them because they fade from memory. So he didn't actually believe that people dreamed. So here's my question. Do you think that your attitudes perfectly predict your behavior? Are attitudes perfect predictors of your behavior? Or does your behavior affect the kinds of attitudes that you have? Well, let's kind of put this to the test. We'll talk about this in a minute. So what are attitudes? Attitudes are feelings, beliefs about objects or events, and ideas. So for example, I believe that masks are uncomfortable and they fog up my glasses, but I also believe that they're probably the best tool that we have at hand right now. Plus, they're kind of cute. Look at my foxes. Look at them. Look at them. Look at it. I want all of you to look at it. Now I'm kind of doing a SpongeBob thing. Teachers don't get the credit they truly deserve, especially in a time like this. Let's extend that to grocery store workers. Let's extend that to all healthcare workers, long-term facility workers, anybody that's basically deemed an essential business. They need more credit. Times is hard. Other beliefs or ideas. Now, one of the things that we're going to find is that your attitude is very largely shaped by context. So when I'm driving my car and somebody's speeding, I'll be like, speeding is wrong. But then I'm behind a very, very slow person on the highway and I want to try to pass them. And at some point in the process of passing them, I might hit 85 miles per hour. All of a sudden, my attitude shifts and I'm like, I just really want to get away from this person. So first of all, that's some actor-observer bias going on. And second of all, my attitude has been modified by the context. So how do our attitudes affect our behavior? So sometimes our behavior really fits with our attitudes. I don't like smoking, so I don't do it. I've never done it. I've never been interested in it. My mother smokes. I see what it does to your hands. I see what it does to your face. And I think it stinks. So I don't do it. That's a pretty simple attitude. But sometimes attitudes do not affect our behavior. And this is what is called a complex attitude. So a simple attitude is when your behavior fits perfectly with your attitudes. When it doesn't, that is what we would call a complex attitude. So here's an example. Dr. Gilchrist is going to ask you a question, and I want all of you on Zoom to raise your hand or say me when I ask you this question. And if you're here in class, raise your hand. By the way, y'all, we're having quite the party. Look, look. There's 3 of us. Look, there's 3. They're all having a ball, and so am I. And I'm happy to be here with all of you too. But here's the question. Do you believe that exercising can help you to be healthy? Raise your hand if you believe that. Okay, let's check out the chat. Yes, yes. Lightness says yes. Rachel says yes. Molly says yes. Okay, and I'm assuming those of you that are not answering, you're either kind of doing something and trying to pay attention to me at the same time. Y'all know how I feel about multitasking. No, I'm kidding. You know I'm kidding. You know I'm kidding, and I'd be a huge hypocrite because sometimes when I'm Zooming, I'm usually also answering emails at the same time. No, multitasking is bad, but yet we all do it. Okay, so here's my next question. So many of us believe that exercising is important for helping us be healthy. Okay. Do you exercise regularly? No.
Oh, wait, yeah, we do live on the third floor.
Okay, Rachel does. Okay. Lightness says no and is laughing. Molly says no. D is shrugging. So we think that exercise is important. So here's my point. If it's important enough to you, you make the time to do it. That means that even if I've got, so I actually do believe that exercising can help to be healthy. Plus, it's the best stress reliever there is. Plus, I like showing off my biceps. So I work out almost every single day, even if it's just for 30 minutes. And so if you don't exercise regularly, does this mean that you're a liar? No, it just means that attitudes don't necessarily predict behavior when the rubber hits the road. So yeah, you are not a perfect person. So here are a few general rules about attitudes. The more specific the attitude is, the more predictive it is. So if I believe that exercise should be a daily habit, so notice I said every day, I'm going to probably be more likely to engage in daily or regular exercise than somebody who goes, yeah, exercise is important. Well, great. Do I know anything about what type of exercise, what frequency you're doing it? No. So odds are pretty good for a really general thing like that. It's a nice thing to say. It is a very nice thing to say, but it's not very predictive. Generally, any attitude that you have that has come from direct experience, you're also probably going to have a very predictive behavior towards it. So for example, buckling your seatbelt in the car is really important. That's an attitude that I have. And in my case, I've actually formed it from direct experience. When I was 4 years old, my grandmother and I were driving in a parking lot, a supermarket parking lot, to visit my mother because she worked at the supermarket. My grandmother's Buick had a problem where the door, even if locked, would suddenly fly open. So I wasn't wearing a seatbelt. When we got in the parking lot, I unbuckled my seatbelt and surprise, surprise, the door flew open. I flew out of the car and onto the pavement, got a black eye. I always wear a seatbelt. And there are really cute pictures of 4-year-old Dr. Gilchrist pointing to her black eye. Additionally, we have a negativity bias with respect to our attitudes. We tend to develop negative attitudes much more quickly, and positive attitudes form much more slowly. So how many of you have the attitude that running is terrible? You probably form that pretty quick. Forming a positive attitude about running takes more work. I can attest. All right, y'all. So thank you so much for being here today. I will see you on running. Running is not for everybody, but it's very, very zen for me. So I will see you all here on Friday. Take care of yourselves, make good decisions, and I will see you later.